Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson, along with my Rafiki, or in the Kiswahili work language, friend, brother Derek Williams. We'd like to welcome you to part two of a discussion that we started on the life and times of the founder of Black History Month, or at the time when he started, was Black History Week, the great, brilliant second graduate of Harvard University with a PhD, Dr. Carter G. Woodson. Now, there's an image of Dr. Woodson. This is the great man that we're talking about on these last two shows. A lot of people heard about one of his books, and that's The Miseducation of the Negro. But he was more than just that. Who is that man? And why did he push the topic of history? W.E.B. Du Bois was the first to graduate Harvard. Dr. Woodson got a PhD at Harvard. Dr. Woodson got his PhD in 1912, I think, at Harvard University, the second black man to do that. But what distinguished him, in my eyes, is that he got his degree strictly as a historian at Harvard. Dr. Du Bois was more of a sociologist, and also he was the first true son of enslaved people. Dr. Du Bois, his parents were one of the few lucky blacks who lived up in Massachusetts. They came from slavery, but they were generations back. They had he went to an integrated school in Massachusetts, so he had that kind of background. Mm-hmm. Carter G. Woodson's parents, both illiterate, but they pushed for education. And again,
been former slaves.
Yeah, former slaves. And I want that to emphasize that there's this image that these folks were ignorant. Yes, boys. If you look at Gone with the Wind and movies like that, then you will see these folks as some kind of, even though they didn't read and write, some of them, but it didn't mean they weren't brilliant.
No.
Doesn't mean they didn't think like you and me.
Absolutely.
They didn't ask for knowledge. They were human beings, and there's remnants of that type of stereotype that still underlines America to this day.
Absolutely.
I could be wrong. What do you think about that?
No, I agree. The idea of a slavery and the idea of stupidity seem to go hand in hand.
Exactly.
We've taken
wrong
the projected stereotypes, and we have, I say we, they have taken the projected
We're connected to them, so I say we. They're us, and we are them. I always connect myself.
You have to justify slavery, first of all. So any admittance of any intellectual stamina, determination,
all the obstacles that were put on you,
is against that whole concept. They're they're not really people. They're kind of animals, one degree below being an animal. So that's why there's such resistance, because if you're going to maintain the lie, then you must maintain the justification for what you did in the first place.
And that's the what was it, the American Dilemma, Heyerdahl?
American Dilemma, yes.
Was that Heyerdahl, the Swede who said something like that?
Yes, the sociologist who did the study. I mean, the conclusion was that.
When did that book come out? Like in 1940s, 50s?
I believe either early 50 or mid 40s. But he stopped in the middle of his research and basically said, it's obvious what the problem is here.
The American
racism. You all have not addressed your initial sin. And until you do, it's going to continue posing the same issues.
And look at the reaction of we always try to bring to the present, because in order to put a light on the present, you use the past as that source of light. And look at what's going on in the news today with the critical race theory, like we talked about a little bit in the last show, which is for some reason claimed to be taught in schools. No, it was something that came out when you and I were wearing afros in the 70s, right? And it's been around all that time, and then these white conservatives are just using that to push. Yeah, me too. Well, I didn't have one, but that bad. But that pushed this thing to again to muddy the waters. And black, as we're going in more and more knowing about ourselves, that fear is rearing its ugly head. We don't want to talk about it. We're afraid that our kids, could not handle the truth. But I'm asking our people. I don't see a lot of German young children today committing suicide or can't handle the fact when they learn about their Nazi forefathers and that stretch of time when they did those horrible things. They could deal with that kind of history. Japanese children who understand what was going on during World War II.
Different rationale for all the
but again, the standard has always been white standard. Yeah. Carter G. Woodson understood that in I think chapter 10 of the Miseducation of the Negro, he said during that period of time of segregation, he said, well, when he was talking to the talented tenth that he was bumping heads with, who wanted to integrate, and forget about our schools. It wasn't about integration. That's the myth. No, Black folks, even after they came out of enslavement in the 1860s, said, we don't want anything but to be financed. We'll take care of our children. We'll educate them. And he said, in the 1920s and the 30s, when he was bumping heads with some of the other black scholars, we're not a monolith. We had disagreements. Okay, let's set this out. We're just like any other creature on this planet, human being, a group. We had the same goals, but different ways of approaching it. He said we should use. He said, I'm for us working, freeing our people. I'm for the laws being changed. He said, but let's use segregation to kill segregation. Yeah. What do you think he meant by that?
Yes, he recognized that the segregation created an environment where we had at least some control over some basic decisions.
Brilliant thinking.
To the typical person, well, we're an integrated society. First of all, we're not an integrated society. But the process of integration dismisses the ability to stand and to utilize all of your own personal resources.
What you have at the time.
And it forces you. I mean, by structural condition. If you have nobody but yourself, then you have to be creative amongst yourselves. That's what he was implying.
He was saying we have, even though this is by law and white America has not subsidized some of the schools, but we have black colleges. Yeah. We said that we have black lawyers being trained. He said, while we control these institutions, train these lawyers to tear down these institutions because they are coming from our perspective. We are teaching them.
Well, by simple examination, he knew of the trickery that had been used, and he was a scholar of human behavior as well.
Thank you.
And that's why when the Freedmen Bureau came down and other liberals at the time offering to take on the educational aspect.
That was for black folks after the Civil War.
After the Civil War and after the Reconstruction. He was saying, we've learned a lot about y'all, okay? We'll take your money, but let us educate our own
We've been doing that's the image of black people we don't get.
Yes.
We get this image that is always, you hear white Americans to this day say, well, we freed you. Yeah. We gave you this. What more do you need? No, you didn't give us anything. We earned it.
And then there are those miseducated who feel that we can't do this by ourselves. If white people are not involved, then we're going to be failures.
Ask the Jewish community. Ask people who are in Chinatown. Okay, they maintain their own control and ownership. We did a series of shows by Dr. Claude Anderson who talked about ownership. Yeah. If you own the thing, then you control how that thing will function. based on
That's
what
right.
you need.
And that's what Carter G. Woodson saw. He recognized and he saw that of all of the groups that the African American was at the bottom of the social order. and he spoke about this even when he traveled around the world and when he was in the Philippines educating children there. He recognized the educational model that constantly prevented the kind of progress for the group that were being educated to do something with the education. He felt that mere education for the sake of education was a folly. He was saying education should free you from these conditions.
And he didn't see that in those talented
No,
tens.
he did
He
not.
saw them coming back worse to the community because they had their heads filled up with Western culture and these ignorant people that they left, and
Yes.
they had more disdain because they were living up to
And he
some
stated
standard.
that, Smokey. He
Exactly.
said, you all are, in a fact, or in a sense, more of a threat to us than the people who make it they make sure you know that we're doing this because we dislike you. He's basically saying that those educational few, those talented tenth, were more destructive because they had access. They had access to our minds, our communities, and if you're not free, if your mind is still in chain, then you become the monster that's greater than those who enchained us to begin with.
Even W.E.B. Du Bois by the 1930s did not believe in the talented tens
That's
that
right.
he came
That's
up
right.
with in Soul of Black Folk
You're right.
in 1904.
Talk
he
on.
he was against it by then because
Yes, he
he saw
was.
the same thing that Carter G. Woodson saw a
That's
decade
right.
earlier.
That's right. I mean, a
Well, let's talk about
cyclical repeat.
let's talk about the foundation of this man who was a focused person. Now, he was born in Canton, Virginia, in 1875. So again, he's that generation that came after the so-called Liberty. So he and his generation experienced from their childhood the result of the 13, 14, and 15 Amendment.
Yes.
And
yes.
what they did, and the black codes.
Yes.
And they did not see much difference.
And the few years that we occupied Congress and the Senate and all,
for people to understand that after the Civil War, during that Reconstruction period, there were something like 2,000 political positions that were run by black people.
Yes.
Again, until about 1876.
Yeah. And so he was a student of that analysis. I mean, he said, is this as far as we've gotten now?
And by the end of the 1800s, by the beginning of the 1900s, all that was gone.
Yeah.
And it wasn't because we weren't capable of doing it, because there were laws that were put in place, black codes, and then there were people who were conditioned for 200 years to look at us a certain way, who couldn't accept the loss of the Civil War. And the fact that are they doing it today?
Well, it was an oops. It was an oops. Oh my goodness, what have we done? And from a contemporary standpoint, we see the same thing. And the aftermath of the election of Barack Obama.
And the aftermath of the civil rights movement with Dr. King. There was we got this euphemism of backlash.
The white backlash.
And why are we still 100 and something years after the Civil War still dealing with the same issues the generation of Carter G. Woodson was dealing with, in the 1870s, 1860s, 1880s and 1890s. The exact same things are being said. Our rights are being violated.
Yes.
There was do you remember that documentary, the Eye on the Prize?
Yes.
Some of you might know that. That's a if you can find it on YouTube, look at it. But I remember they were discussing the counter. When black people were sitting in the Woolworth counter and stuff like that. One of the reporters asked the white waitress why she's upset with these black men and college men and women sitting at her counter. She said they were violating her rights.
My goodness.
Okay, she was upset because they just sat down and she had to serve these black people. Now this is in the early 1960s.
Just yesterday.
100 years after the end, the end of the Civil War. 100 years later,
Violating
and we
her rights.
still had that same mentality. Something didn't click, and that's the era that Carter G. Woodson was looking at. Why things have not changed?
Yes.
And why are we still struggling as black people to articulate why we need that? If you don't have that history,
and the righteousness, Smokey, of others thinking that their rights are greater than ours. From a contemporary standpoint, the discussion of making someone feel uncomfortable because you're discussing a topic. I mean, the audacity of one group saying, you're making me feel uncomfortable, therefore I have the authority to eliminate that from the school curriculum. And so...
we're the racists.
Yes.
Because we want the thing that we were, as Martin Luther King said in that speech, wasn't about little black boys and little black girls when he was talking about the March of Washington. He said there is a check that bounced.
That's right. We're coming to Washington to collect
insufficient funds. And that's what he's talking about, the promises that was made after the Civil War by the same government, and we're still dealing with that kind of mentality today in the Republican Party or the neoconservative, whatever term they're using is the same idea. And if you don't understand that history, Carter G. Woodson is saying you use that history to understand the present.
That's right. Oh, the faux pas that was committed recently, as it is alleged to be by Mitch McConnell, saying that African Americans, in terms of their financial, the voting, that they vote at the same rate as Americans. These kind of statements are so integrated into people's psyche, and that's what Carter G. Woodson was talking about. He was saying, we know the enemy, we know the mandate that they have, and so let's focus on us. But let's not just focus on us from a standpoint of study. Let's take study and apply it to measurable progress and being in control of our future.
Carter G. Woodson left his home, in which he was working as a sharecropper with his mother and father, at the age of 17.
Oh, my goodness.
Okay? But his mother, Eliza, and his father, James, illiterate, ex-slaves, enslaved people, insisted on the education of him and his brothers and sisters.
Yes.
In fact, his uncles, Eliza's brothers, were Union soldiers, and they
had father,
and they were educated in the Union, and they became teachers. Again, we always focus on education.
Yes.
That's something that we
the liberation of the mind.
Of course, and we always knew that. We would never, this image of us being ignorant people is a lie.
Yes.
And he went, but he ended up following his brother to the coal mines of West Virginia. Okay, and he worked in those coal mines for 3 years. People don't realize that this brilliant brother did not start high school until the age of 20.
Wow.
Because he worked in the coal mine, sending money to his parents.
Yes.
To make sure they were taken care of.
Yeah. He had work to do. He
got work to do. That's what got his focus.
Yes.
Took him that long. And he was not the only black scholar that had to do that from that generation, that period of time. They had to negate their education in order to function in a society that by law was established by white America.
Well, I think the importance of that, Smokey, people say, wow, 20 years of age. But from a contemporary standpoint, there are so many of our young men and women who feel that they're 19, 20, and they didn't finish school, then there's no hope for them. Here's the model.
Thank you.
Okay?
That's why I brought it up.
Sometimes formal education needs to be put on hold while you take care
Refocus
of
your
your
mind.
survival.
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
And then let's not forget informal education. You're still being educated. Okay, so the fact that we have a system structure that by a certain age you should have graduated from the 12th grade is not an eliminator. There are still opportunities, and I'm speaking, making this program applicable to our viewing audience.
Yeah.
Young people, older people, there are still opportunities. Don't let 10, 15 years just shut you down and you're walking around talking about I can't make it, or look what I've done of my future, and I don't have a career. We have the models to prove that once the mind says, hey, this is important, and regardless of a few years having slipped away in your structured life. So from an application standpoint, I believe that this is the message that he gave us during that period of his life. You can still do it. It can still be done.
And another thing, during that 3 years or so that he was in those coal mines in West Virginia, there were ex-black soldiers.
Oh, yes.
Who were in there with him, you know. They always use our bodies, no problem. You know, we couldn't own anything.
Oh, because labor.
But again, to show these brilliant, all illiterate. And they would gather at an older gentleman's house there called Oliver Jones.
Oh, yes.
And Oliver Jones recognized this young black boy brilliant because he could read, that thanks to his mother and his uncles.
He was a commodity.
And he was a brilliant, and he talked. And him and some of his other friends would gather, and they would have these discussions, okay, about what's going on. Now, they're in West Virginia now.
Yes.
What they did to help that brother, they gathered their little change that they got together, in which they would send out for newspapers, magazines, all across the country. New York Times or the black newspapers from Chicago or New York.
Pittsburgh Courier.
Yeah, and they would have him read to them these articles of what was going on.
Know what was going on.
And then they would have these discussions about the topics that they would have.
Yes.
William Jennings Bryan and all that.
They gave him ice cream and cookies.
And he would have them, and they would ice cream and cookies, and pay him a little something to do that. And they hired this 17-year-old. And this helped him. He never forgot that.
No,
he never forgot that. And then when he left at the age of 20, it took him 2 years to finish high school. It was always using his brilliance. Okay. Then after high school, he went to college called Brea.
But before you move to that point, I just want to remind you that he promised those former.
Yeah, he won't forget that he would write about them.
He would write about them. He would tell their stories one day.
Yeah,
I think that's
he wrote in a publication that he established in 1937 called the Negro History Bulletin.
Yes,
and in 1937, from his home in 9th Street, that is now a historical site, where he will publish his Negro History Bulletin. The purpose of the Negro History Bulletin, I'm glad you reminded me, was to have curriculum. He would gather information. He's a historian.
Yes.
And he was like focused. That was he focused. Not only was he training other historians during that period of time, but he would establish which was sent out to teachers all over, not only the country, all over the world.
All over the world.
And he would give them these historical information about
black people. Give them a resource to develop a curriculum that was meaningful
in their school.
Yeah.
Okay, black folks were doing that, and it took about 1937. And and he would write articles in there, and one of the articles was about these men that helped him during that period of time and how they helped educate him, because he saw how black men who were so-called illiterate had the knowledge they from West Virginia in a house.
They just didn't have the formal education. Yeah. But they had the knowledge.
But that means, and that's what we must understand about who we are.
Yes.
If you could function in a world where by law it was illegal and you had lynchings and all this stuff going on in the early 1900s and the late 1800s, you think we could worry about these folks who are trying to put these, taking away our voting rights today?
Yeah.
That we come from people who had to deal with that, and look what they accomplished in the same time. Models of possibilities.
Yes. And if you want to test that out for many of us, just think of the stories that have been told to us about our grandparents and great-grandparents, the historical significance of what they did in our lives. And that Grandpa Brown, you know, he had 4 or 5 jobs. He had his own farm. I mean, we have the evidence, even in our own family trees, that many of our folk who were not formally educated were some of the most intelligent and smartest people that we would ever meet. And so I think from a contemporary standpoint, you know, use your own history. See that this stuff is living information. Reflect on your people and those who didn't have formal education but who accomplished great things and made it possible for you to be here today.
Didn't mean they were any less brilliant. You know, if you saw him before his 17th birthday, a child who had no high school education, you automatically, or any white person would think that he was stupid.
Yes.
This was a brilliant child.
Why don't you mention the curiosity that people had about what he did with his time?
Oh yeah,
little humor there.
Sadly, he died. He died in 1950, April of 1950, in his home that he bought in 1922 after a little stint at Howard University. Because he was always teaching, but he just couldn't deal with the structured.
Yes.
You know, because one of the things that traveled with him throughout his time as a scholar was that he believed in us dealing with our own, owning our own, doing it for ourselves,
be a part of your own resolution.
And one of the things that he bumped head with the established talented 10 who went to these schools, who got their degrees, who believed in getting money from institutions and philanthropists, white philanthropists. What ended up happening that the white philanthropists start controlling what will be put into their work, and he was not about that. Yes. So from his so he always focused on he mopped the floors of that house.
Yes.
On the top floor, it was a 3-story house. He lived on the top, and the other 2 floors was where his organization, which still exists today, the Association for the Study of Negro or Black History and Life, which published the history. First of all, the Negro Journal, which is what he established in 1916, and then the Black History Bulletin. But when he died in 1950, W.D. Du Bois were asking some of his ex-students who lived at the house with him to write his obituary. You know, what did he do? What did he like? And even those folks who were with him, one of them had a journal that he would write every day, would say, you know what? All I saw him was work.
The work.
What he did for his time. And he used to tell us, you know, coming from where he came from, the enslaved people, he was always proud of his heritage. He said, nobody could outwork me.
Yeah, yeah.
That was something he said all about. And that's how he lived, and that's how he died. I got maybe an image of a statue that
let's see it.
Is in front of that home. This is in front of this home,
wow.
which is a historical site right now in Washington, D.C., in the Sherman area of D.C.
Oh, I got to get up there and
this
see
is
that.
in front of his 9th Street home. You could go there to this day and walk the hall that he walked in which he published many of his great works by himself or with the help of these young, talented men that he trained that became historians in their own right.
Yes.
So try to give people a little insight on that man. We know about Dr. Carter G. Woodson. In 1926, he established Black History Month Week, you know, and maybe knew about the miseducation of the Negroes, but you didn't hear about the history in our the Negro in our history. He always tried to educate, or the Negroes and their orations, Negro orators and their orations. So until next time, and to the honor of our ancestors, I always end with peace, hotep, bye-bye.